Jasmine Crockett stuns Bill Maher on live TV. One comeback that silenced the room. When Bill Maher tried to dismiss Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with a smirking remark about emotion and identity, he didn't just start a conversation. He ignited a cultural fault line. What followed wasn't a clapback. It was a recalibration of power, broadcast live with millions watching and none expecting what came next. The setting was familiar. Real Time with Bill Maher, filmed at CBS Television City in Los Angeles, a show known for pushing limits under the guise of satire. But this time, the script didn't hold. Because when Jasmine Crockett spoke, she didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She redirected the room and the narrative. Backstage moments before airtime, Jasmine sat alone in the dressing room. It wasn't cold, but it felt that way, polished, impersonal, like a space that had been cleaned too many times to remember people still breathed inside it. Her phone was in her hand, screen dimmed. No one had asked if she needed anything. No one had introduced her to the other guests. She didn't need confirmation that the night would be loaded. She already had it. 2 days earlier, her communications director had warned her. They're calling it a discussion on polarization and civility, he said. But if Maher goes where I think he might, it'll be bait. Just be ready. She'd heard that tone before. Not the words, the warning behind them. This wasn't going to be a fair panel. This was going to be a test of tone, of poise, of how much she could take without breaking. She didn't plan to break. Reese, her assistant, poked his head through the door. 2 minutes. She stood, adjusted her powder blue blazer, and followed him through the hallway toward the stage. As she passed the black and white portraits on the walls, icons of political television, almost all men, she didn't slow. Just one more set where someone thought they could define her worth by how quietly she spoke. Bill Maher was already seated when she walked out. He nodded barely and gestured to her chair like it was part of the performance. The lights came up. The music played. The red on-air light blinked to life. Maher opened with a grin. Our next guest is a rising Democratic congresswoman from Texas. She's young, sharp, and possibly the future of the party, unless emotion gets in the way. The audience chuckled. Jasmine didn't. She crossed her legs, folded her hands, and looked at him like a woman who had heard this script before. Good to be here, she said flat and clear. Maher jumped in. Let's start simple. Why do so many progressives these days feel the need to moralize everything? Jasmine blinked. Once, then answered not with volume, but with precision. Moralizing, huh? I think you mean standing up for people who don't usually get heard. Maher smirked. Sure. But don't you think sometimes passion gets in the way of governing? There's a lot of yelling. Not a lot of results. It's like everyone's trying to go viral instead of get things done. A few polite chuckles from the audience. Jasmine stayed still. I get it. Young people, especially young women, especially young, black women get labeled emotional when we care too much, or angry when we speak directly. Meanwhile, someone else can lose their temper curse on air, and that's passion. Interesting, isn't it? The chuckles stopped. Maher shifted. You're making this about identity. I'm talking about approach. People want solutions, not lectures. And I'm telling you, Jasmine said, you can't separate identity from approach. If someone grows up watching their community get ignored, underfunded, blamed, what do you expect them to sound like when they finally get a mic? Soft. Now the air in the room was different. No one laughed. Maher pressed again, searching for control. But isn't that the problem? The mic becomes a weapon instead of a tool. Congress feels like a stage now. Jasmine let out a soft, low laugh. You know what's wild? It's always been a stage. You just never noticed when the same people were writing every act. But now that someone new is reading from the script, suddenly it's performative. A soft whoa came from the crowd. No cue card told them to say it. It just slipped out. Maher reached for his water glass. Jasmine didn't move. Okay, okay, he said, trying to reset. So let's take the emotion out of it. Policy-wise, what's actually being done? That depends, Jasmine said. Do you mean what's being proposed or what's being blocked? Mayer tilted his head. Explain. Take voting rights. I helped draft legislation that would have expanded polling access, more locations, better accommodations for disabled voters, stronger mail-in protections. That's not emotional, that's structural. But every time we bring it up, someone calls it overreach. So I ask who's really holding progress back? Maher leaned back. Maybe it's just not that simple. No, she said. It is that simple. What's complicated is trying to justify systems that benefit some and pretend they serve everyone. Now the audience wasn't reacting. They were locked in. But Maher wasn't done. He paused, smiled thinly, then launched the real hit. Well, you talk a lot about how hard it is for women like you, but isn't part of leadership being able to take criticism without calling it oppression? It didn't land like a punchline. It landed like a door slamming. Jasmine didn't answer. Not right away. She looked at him long enough to make it uncomfortable, and then turned just slightly toward the crowd. Let me ask you something, she said softly. If I explain how certain systems push people to the margins, and your first instinct is to say, I'm playing victim, what does that say about how you listen? You could hear it in the room, the silence. Not awkward. Not staged, heavy. I'm not oppressed because someone disagrees with me. I'm pointing out a pattern, and the moment I name it, the conversation shifts. From what's true to whether I'm too sensitive, that's not debate, that's deflection. The camera stayed on Maher. His expression didn't break, but the moment cracked. Jasmine didn't stop. Let's be real. You've built a career on being provocative, on pushing against the mainstream. But when a black woman does the same thing, when she challenges you, you don't call it bold. You call it emotional, a clap, then another, then half the room. Maher lifted his hand. Let's keep it civil. Jasmine turned to him. I am being civil, she said. I'm just not being small. That line didn't explode. It cut. No crescendo. No music swell. Just a single sentence that held its own gravity. Maher blinked, sat back, exhaled almost like a laugh, but it wasn't. The control had shifted, and the whole room knew it. The cameras were still rolling, but the balance had already shifted. Jasmine Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken protocol. She hadn't even leaned forward. But her final words, I'm just not being small, hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Maher didn't respond right away. He reached for his notes, his hand moving a touch faster than before. Not panicked, just unsettled. For someone used to steering every exchange, this was unfamiliar territory. Jasmine, by contrast, simply adjusted her blazer, sat back, waited. The audience didn't erupt, they leaned in. Because what they were watching wasn't a viral moment, it was a recalibration in real time. A host challenged, a guest unshaken, a system briefly exposed. The rest of the segment moved forward, but the rhythm was gone. Maher tried, pivoting another topic and another panelist, but the tension didn't reset. It lingered under every question, every laugh, that didn't land every attempt to return to the show's usual groove. And then the show was over. Credits rolled. Applause signs blinked. The music faded out. But nothing felt closed. Backstage, Jasmine walked with Reese down the hallway back toward the dressing room. Neither of them spoke until the door shut behind them. Reese broke the silence. You're trending. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Already, he nodded and held up her phone. No, Pontu on X, and climbing. Mentions flooded the screen. Clips, edits, memes. One quote looped again and again. I'm not being small. It had already been turned into GIFs overlaid on dramatic music, typed in bold white font, like it had been pre-written for the moment. Except it wasn't. It was real. And people were feeling it. Jasmine exhaled. They're going to twist it. They already are, Reese said. But people are eating it up. This isn't just political Twitter. It's everyone. There was no knock from producers. No handshake. No thanks. Just a quiet assistant opening the door and saying, "You're clear." That was fine. Jasmine didn't need a postmortem. In the car, she stayed mostly silent. Her inbox pinged with interview requests, CNN, MSNBC morning radio, a few YouTube pundits trying to jump on the moment. By the time they reached the hotel, the notifications were endless. When they got to her room, Reese scrolled through a handful of headlines. Congresswoman Crockett lashes out at Bill Maher in on-air clash. Jasmine stared at the screen, shook her head. Lashes out, she muttered. Every time a woman sets a boundary, it's violence. Reese didn't reply. He just placed the phone on the table and walked to the window. Later, Jasmine sat in the quiet of her hotel room, heels off blazer draped over a chair. She turned on the TV, no volume, and there she was. Her own face mid-sentence replayed in slow motion. A panel of commentators debated the moment. One called her response divisive. Another called it measured. One said it was why Democrats struggle. Another said she never even raised her voice. Jasmine didn't listen long. She rubbed the arch of her foot, then turned off the screen. Her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. DC area code. She let it ring twice before picking up. "This is Jasmine," a calm male voice answered. "Congresswoman Crockett, this is Ed Ramos at CNN. We'd love to have you on tomorrow morning for a segment just to follow up on your appearance tonight." Jasmine paused. "I'll have my team get back to you." She hung up. Reese looked over. "You want me to say no?" Jasmine leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "I want you to say, we'll think about it." Because that was the truth. She wasn't chasing the mic. She wasn't ducking it either. But she wasn't about to let herself become a soundbite, just so someone else could steer the story. Across social media, the clip was everywhere. Not with hashtags, not with outrage, with something quieter, deeper. Teachers were sharing it. College students, activists, journalists, not just for the politics, for the posture. One video, 15 seconds long, showed her face, her tone, her line. That line, "I'm not being small." Someone stitched it onto footage of protests. Another overlaid it on scenes from classrooms. A young woman from Ohio posted a selfie holding a sticky note with Jasmine's quote written in black Sharpie. Her caption said, "I've never had the words for it. Until now." And yet Jasmine knew the applause wouldn't last, because by morning the backlash would come. And when it did, it would be loud. By morning, the backlash had arrived, louder than any applause from the night before. Headlines lined up like dominoes, all pulling from the same shallow script. Congresswoman clapbacks on Maher Crockett goes viral for fiery exchange. Maher versus Crockett, who took it too far. The word clapback was everywhere. So were torches, lashes out, and heated exchange. None of it surprised Jasmine, but it still pressed against her like static. At her kitchen counter in Dallas, coffee reheated in the microwave, she scrolled through her mentions not for the noise, but to track the tone. It was split. Some called her brave. Some called her divisive. A few even asked if she was pulling the race card, as if identity were a gimmick, not a reality. The usual circles did their usual thing, but what stuck with her were the subtler betrayals. An older congressman, someone she once admired, tweeted vaguely about the importance of decorum and not inflaming discourse. No names. But the subtext was clear. Cable panels dissected her tone. Podcasts launched emergency episodes. Pundits asked whether Crockett had overplayed the moment. Not one of them mentioned that she hadn't raised her voice once. She wasn't surprised, but she was tired. Reese sat across from her skimming requests. 25 interview pitches since sunrise, he said. NPR, MSNBC, BBC. Even that podcast you said no to twice. Jasmine looked out the window. The light was shifting, clouds giving way to sun. Do they want to talk policy? Reese hesitated. Mostly they want a reaction. Of course they did. Later that afternoon, a Capitol staffer called her office directly. Respectful tone, familiar message. We appreciate what you said, but just be careful. The press doesn't always treat these moments kindly. Translation. You made them uncomfortable. Don't do it again. She knew that warning well. She'd heard it after committee hearings, after town halls, after every moment where her voice was just a little too clear for someone else's comfort. But what stung most wasn't what came from the outside. It was what came from inside. Some colleagues reached out. Quietly. Said things like, wish I could have said that, or that needed to be said. But publicly, they were silent. And that silence was loud. Jasmine didn't strike back. No tweet storms, no Instagram live rebuttals. Instead, she went to work. She called community leaders, checked in with organizers she trusted, held a Zoom session with high schoolers from Garland. One girl said, I felt seen. Jasmine smiled. That moment. That mattered more than the trending hashtag. What no one wrote about was how much strength it takes to stay measured, to sit across from someone challenging your intelligence, your approach, your tone, and not flinch, to respond without retaliating, to carry centuries of coded expectations in your voice and still choose calm over spectacle. They called it a comeback, a clapback. But it wasn't either. It was boundary setting. It was self-respect. And for many watching, it was the first time they'd seen someone hold their ground without losing it. That night, Jasmine sat alone at her desk. The laptop glowed with unanswered emails, statements to approve, requests to filter. She ignored them. Instead, she opened her journal, a plain black notebook, leather cover worn at the edges. She wrote 5 words, not loud, just clear enough, then closed it. The next day, the buzz began to settle. The media moved on. A celebrity divorce, a leaked video, a new political scandal from Ohio. Jasmine's name faded from the headlines, but not from people's minds. In a town hall in Mesquite, a woman in her 50s pulled Jasmine aside. I've sat in meetings for years where men talked over me, she whispered. You said the thing I never could. There was admiration in her eyes, but also grief. I just wish I'd said it sooner. And then came the voicemail. A retired pastor from Longview. Didn't agree with everything you said, he admitted, but I respected how you carried yourself. That's how grown folks should talk. Keep speaking plain. Those weren't clips. Those weren't tweets. They were proof that the message had landed not just loudly, but deeply. This wasn't about scoring a moment. It was about setting a new standard, and Jasmine knew that's what lasts. The internet had moved on, but the moment hadn't. In the days following her appearance on Real Time, Jasmine Crockett wasn't trying to ride the wave. She was navigating the undertow. Because what had happened wasn't just visibility, it was exposure. And when you show up clearly in a system built to blur you, there's always a cost. The headlines quieted, but the consequences began to hum beneath the surface. Her team tracked the shift. Some donors pulled back, subtle, no explanation. A few press requests suddenly vanished, and colleagues who once called her fresh air started using phrases like polarizing in internal meetings. No one said it outright, but she could feel it. There's a particular fatigue that comes from being the person who doesn't flinch when it would be easier to. Jasmine felt it in her shoulders, in the curve of her jaw, in the silence after a meeting where no one looked her in the eye. Not because she was wrong, but because she had made them feel too seen. Still, she didn't apologize. Not for what she said. Not for how she said it. Because she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't talked over anyone. She hadn't walked into that studio to clap back. She'd walked in to speak clearly. And somehow that was what made people most uncomfortable. A group of student interns visited her office later that week, political science majors from small Texas colleges. They sat in a conference room, notebooks open, questions ready. One young man from Lubbock leaned forward. How do you decide when to speak up and when to stay quiet? Jasmine didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a moment, then said, You don't wait for the moment to feel safe. You speak when the silence feels heavier than the risk. The intern scribbled, nodded, looked at her not just as a congresswoman, but as proof. Another girl, quiet, unsure, raised her hand. How do you stay calm when people talk down to you? I talk fast. I get emotional. People say I care too much. Jasmine smiled, not out of pity, but recognition. Keep caring, she said. That's the part they're scared of. They sat in silence for a beat. Not awkward, just full. When they left, Jasmine stood at the window, watching them walk back toward the Capitol steps. She didn't need them to remember her name. She needed them to remember that they didn't have to make themselves smaller to be taken seriously. Later that evening, she returned to her desk, opened the same black journal. This time she wrote, Stillness is not surrender. Clarity is not conflict. She closed the notebook not because the thought was done, but because she didn't need to prove the rest. Because clarity wasn't the same as loudness. And boundaries once drawn don't need to be re-explained. Not when they're lived. A week after the episode aired, the viral noise had thinned. The headlines had faded into algorithmic oblivion. The memes slowed. The hashtag stopped climbing. Jasmine Crockett's face no longer appeared nightly on cable recaps, but the real story was only starting to settle in places that don't trend, in conversations not designed for broadcast. In Tulsa, a high school teacher sent Jasmine a letter, handwritten. I played your clip in my civics class, she wrote. Not for the politics, for the posture. We talk a lot about bullying, but we rarely teach what it looks like to stand up for yourself without striking back. Jasmine read it twice. A few days later, a man in his 60s from rural Oregon called her office. I don't agree with you on a lot, he said in his voicemail, but I saw how calm you were. I've never seen someone take a hit and respond without throwing one back. That stuck with me. This was the aftershock. Quiet, slow, real. People weren't quoting her for the burn. They were reflecting on the boundary, because something had shifted not just in how Jasmine was seen, but in what she made others see in themselves. It wasn't about being the loudest. It was about what still echoes after the noise. A week turned into 10 days. Then 2 weeks. Jasmine's clip still surfaced from time to time, in a thread about political discourse, in a reel about leadership, in group chats where women traded stories about meetings that made them small. But it wasn't the views that stayed with Jasmine. It was the conversations that happened afterward, in a grocery store aisle, at a community center in Mesquite, in the line at a local coffee shop. People would stop her not to quote her, but to thank her. You said what I've wanted to say for years. I didn't even know I needed to hear that until you said it. You didn't flinch. That meant everything. These weren't fans. They were witnesses. People who'd spent years in rooms where they were told to lower their voice, smile more smooth the edges. People who had been called too much, too emotional, too aggressive for simply being direct. And now they had language for something they'd only ever felt. Not because Jasmine went viral, but because Jasmine had refused to shrink. It wasn't just political, it was personal. The deeper message wasn't clap back harder. It was, you don't need permission to be whole. You don't owe anyone a softer version of yourself just to make them more comfortable. In a culture obsessed with takedowns and gotchas, Jasmine's moment wasn't about dominating a stage. It was about reclaiming space without apology. And the beauty of it, she never once raised her voice. Most people won't sit across from a national host with millions watching. Most won't have their words dissected on morning panels. Most won't trend or go viral or get misquoted on a loop. But most will find themselves in a room one day where someone makes them feel smaller. It might be in a workplace, a classroom, a dinner table, a meeting. That's where this story lives now. Not in the clip, but in the reflection it stirred. In that second where someone tries to measure your worth by your delivery. And you decide, I'm not being small. Not to win, not to fight, but to stay whole. Because once you choose not to shrink, they don't forget it. And neither do you.